Hi, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show on YouTube and Podbean and any other kind of Stitcher downloadable podcasting app you might be using there. And we are coming on to do a special coronavirus is the word I'm using for the coronavirus special episode, obviously because things are heating up around the world, particularly here in the UK. We're getting new legislation coming in on a daily basis. And we've also welcomed Stephen Sakellarios, who joined us a few months ago when we were talking about reincarnation. And we thought we'd get his take on it from the United States. But also we thought we'd welcome back Andy Thomas of the Truth Agenda, who spoke to us very shortly ago, maybe a month or two back, talking about his recent re-edition of the book, Conspiracy Theories. So we thought we'd get Andy's take on it, because unfortunately Andy's book had just been published, or was literally just about to be published, and then this thing really opened up worldwide. And I said to Andy by email, I said, I bet you'd wish it had come a bit sooner so you could have got your whole chapter in there. So welcome, gentlemen. Of course, we got Andy Chaplin there, given his viewpoint from near London. So welcome, gentlemen. So Andy Thomas, as you're the conspiracy theorist, researcher and author, what would you like to say to everybody?
I think I'd like to say that everybody is totally confused, very anxious, and where this is going to go, I think it's still a great unknown. And I mean, clearly, because, you know, I'm known for what I do, I am getting bombarded with people with their theory as to whether the virus is real, or if it is real, was it bioengineered, or is it merely natural, and all points in between. But I think what I think is coming across to me as the key point, which I'm sure we are going to cover tonight, is that many people worry that whatever its real origin, it's being used to shut society down, to manipulate the economy and take away freedom of speech. And I think even if it is a completely, you know, kosher, real thing, that I do fear is going to be a consequence of that. And that is something that I'm hearing many people, you know, really expressing deep concerns about.
Andy Chaplin, so you've been posting various things on Facebook lately. What's your latest take on things?
I would absolutely agree with Andy Thomas in that there's so many different elements to this and different theories on this that we really don't know. So I mean, there's theories such as did one man eat a bat or a snake in a Chinese market, and that's how it spread. I personally don't believe that. I mean, Chinese markets have been around possibly for decades, maybe centuries. Chinese people have been eating raw food and wet market stuff for eons. So I could be wrong, but I don't think that's it. I've heard another theory that apparently, because there's two biological weapons facilities right next to Wuhan, the wet market in Wuhan, there's a theory that somebody tried to sell a biological weapon to somebody else, and the vial smashed on the floor and it got released. And this is why, because there's been different outbreaks and different diseases, over the past, especially the past 2 decades, Ebola, SARS, all that kind of thing. So the Chinese seem to have a very over-the-top reaction to dealing with it, quarantining people down and kind of blasting out these disinfectant sprays and that kind of thing, almost like an overkill approach to it, which makes me wonder if they actually knew what had happened, if they knew that this vial had been smashed. I'm hearing other theories that this could be actually the white hats. So this could be Trump taking down the cabal, putting people on lockdown and going after the black hat people, which is not a racial thing. This is like good and evil in simplistic terms. But it's interesting that 30,000 American troops apparently were deployed to Italy to lock Italy down, or help Italy go into lockdown. Why is that not other European countries? Why is it America? So there's a theory that maybe they're going for the Vatican. Maybe they're going to try and take down kind of like the cardinals and the popes and this alleged child smuggling ring, all that kind of thing. We've got other weird things. You guys have probably heard about all the CEOs of companies stepping down one by one by one by one by one. They're stepping down. That's very odd. We've got Oprah Winfrey's house allegedly raided by the police. She was quite pally with Harvey Harvey Weinstein. So could it be that the white hats are actually going for the black hats? I've heard a view that actually this is the black hats and this is the big population cull. Perhaps this is kind of like to cull the population. Perhaps the 5G is part of this. Perhaps this is also about martial law. And as you know, we've got to say it, the New World Order, Agenda 21. All of those people with tinfoil hats, all of the people, all the preppers. Do you remember the Sky programs where they took the piss out of the preppers and said, oh, they're just crazy conspiracy theories? Well, they're not laughing now. People prepping, they're going quite loony on the supermarket front. What I've been doing, I believe that you need to stockpile, but not do it in a crazy fashion. The thing that I worry more about than the coronavirus itself, which, let's face it, apparently has a 98 or 99% survival rate. The thing I worry about more is, as you say, Neil, the loss of the freedom of speech, the martial law and the cracking down on that kind of thing, but also the idea that perhaps society could break down. If we can survive this if the electricity and the water stays on, and if there's at least a trickle of food coming into the supermarkets. I think it's a good idea to ration. I think we can get through this if water and electricity and the supermarkets to some degree have some kind of food coming in. The one big concern I have is people losing their minds and going crazy, and the rioting and the looting. I don't know if you've seen it, Neil, but there are photographs people are taking in the UK on the M25 of army tanks and army jeeps, and I've seen photos with COVID-19 quarantine team written on them. I've personally seen them. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not kind of alleged. I have seen them. So that's going on. I think probably we will need troops on the streets if we do go into a lockdown. Have you guys noticed this? It's kind of like there's two mindsets. It's kind of like we don't want martial law, and we don't want suppression of speech, and we don't want kind of like mandatory vaccines. But on the other hand, we do have a crisis here, and if we don't have those things, society could collapse. I wonder if one of you guys could pick up on that.
Well, it's so similar to terrorism. I mean, it's kind of the same response. You know, we don't want to lose our freedoms, and yet, you know, maybe we have to. You know, it's kind of that tension.
Andy Thomas, you would be a good responder for that question, I think.
Well, I mean, it's classic because irrespective of the origin of the virus, or even if you wish to argue it doesn't exist, which I don't personally agree with, but even if you argue that, what we're seeing is control by fear. You know, it's the oldest trick in the book. You get a nation, and in this case, a whole world in fear. You can do anything you want, and the majority of people will go along with that. And of course, what that does is it gets those people that are, you know, understandably fearful for their loved ones and their own lives. It gets them attacking anybody that says anything that is perceived to be, you know, out of line, that could harm people by spreading, you know, harmful misinformation that means in their eyes that people aren't getting to the true information. Now we're seeing a lot of that. So, you know, if you post anything on Facebook and you even question the official view, it's amazing how many people come right back and say, how dare you, and you're dangerous, and this disgraceful nonsense shouldn't be allowed. So what we're seeing, you know, on a daily basis now is people saying there is an orthodoxy. You won't question that orthodoxy, and if you do, you will be effectively ostracized. And my wider fear here is that this, of course, will be associated with all alternative thinking or conspiracy thinking, and in the end, it will be used as a tool to get rid of that completely from the online world, which is, you know, already something that I've been worried about for a while, and we talked about that on this show before. But I do think this could well be the crowbar that really does that. Yeah, I think there are serious implications for where we go from here, regardless of what's even really going on. People's perception of what's really going on, in a way, matters more here than the reality.
I think you're right, Andy. I think you're right. Stephen, what's your take?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Well, the one thing I noticed is that prior to this virus, there was an increase in protests, public protests. And it was spreading, seemed to me, in you know, Hong Kong and France, and it was ramping up. and now it's over. So that's like a huge effect.
Mm.
And it's very nice for the people in power, you know, because it was getting here in the United States to where they were arresting a certain number of people in each protest, as near as I could tell. It was getting to where it was scary to go protest because you had a chance of getting arrested, you know. And now they don't have to worry about it. They have a perfect piece of leverage to tell people that you cannot publicly protest. No more than, now it's not supposed to be more than 10 people get together.
Wow.
You can't hold a protest, you know, with just 10 people.
I have a worry that I mean, humanity, I think, will survive. There is a 98 and 99% survival rate. My worry is that if, for instance, the internet went down, would they then introduce internet 2, where it's more like TV channels, where it's kind of like state mandated, you know, approved websites, and any alternative thinking, as Andy Thomas was talking about, is kind of out the window, and people are only getting the government line. This could be hugely dangerous.
Well, actually, interestingly, I was just updating our Paranormal Peep Show on YouTube, which gets released tomorrow morning on the 19th of March. That's with Leo Bonomo. And a banner appeared in my YouTube window bar saying that due to the coronavirus, they are not using as many YouTube reviewers as usual. I didn't know they had that, where people at YouTube would actually review each video to make sure it's safe, in quotes. So their system, algorithms, or whatever you want to call it, that controls these things, might kind of sling your video or my video or someone controversial video in the bin straight away, simply because it contains a few words of that it doesn't like or something like that. So instantly, what you're saying there is coming true with like internet 2.
Interesting what you're saying about words they don't like, because as I think it was Stephen or Andy picked up, there's huge censorship going on. I'm getting loads of complaints from people on Facebook saying, why is my post being taken down? And it's just quite innocent posts. It's quite you know, normal everyday average posts. I'm having even kind of like news links posts taken down, and I'm noticing that a few things, even mentioning the word coronavirus, even if you're being you know, uplifting or trying to give people hope, there's, you know, a few of those are still being taken down.
Well, I think this was tested in a way in China in the early stages of this, because it turns out that they were censoring, you know, all social media, which is already censored more than usual over there. But basically, it was, you know, getting rid of any text or any mention of the virus. And as a result, of course, it seemed to grow perhaps more than it should have done, because the initial policy seemed to be just to do nothing. Now, there's a side theory, which of course says that was the whole point, they let it grow. But either way, yes, I think we will see very similar levels of censorship here. And yes, if the subtlety of the YouTube filtration process is being sort of whittled down just to a few algorithms, you won't stand a chance. And I think that's everything they've wanted for a long while. And my fear is we will never come back from this. And I think the controls that the powers that be get from this current sort of scare, I don't think they will ever be handed back to us, at least. And I think that freedom of speech and freedom of movement as well, we're going to see a lot of things which people have been worried for many years about, the whole Agenda 21 theories, you know, we'll start to see as being a clear pattern towards that, containing populations. And, you know, the fact that people are being restricted to their homes now, it's almost as if we're going to get used to not going too many places and just being nicely, you know, boxed up and good little boys and girls. And of course, that's a society that's much easier to control. And once we've got the Internet of Things all around us, surrounding us in our homes, constant surveillance every second of your day. They want to know everything you do, everything when you eat, when you go to the toilet. And we will run into that because people will say, well, we had to do this as a necessary sacrifice to save us all. And that's how they do it. You know, it's the classic problem, reaction, solution equation. And you really can see that, I think, going on right now.
Yeah, now it's interesting because I think on our last show, when I was chatting to Andy Chaplin, when we were recording with Leo, we had a good 10-minute discussion, didn't we, Andy, about this coronavirus before our actual show, which was on mediumship. And I reminded Andy, I certainly, maybe Andy Thomas, you might remember this series, and I certainly shared it with you, Stephen, a few days ago. This series from 1975 called Survivors on BBC. And I don't know how many, if it was a series 1 or 2 or just one series, I can't remember. And I remember watching it as maybe a 10 or 11 years old, thinking it was really kind of scary at the time. But it was basically the same idea as some sort of virus gets out into the open world and people drop like flies. And there's literally pockets of humanity that are literally scrambling to survive by themselves. And they kind of get together in small communities, but it literally becomes a very dog eat dog world there. But the opening title sequence was I'd forgotten, obviously all those years ago, the opening title sequence was quite pertinent, because it starts off, and it was obviously the thing they played in every episode was the opening title sequence of this Oriental man, like a scientist with glasses on, and he accidentally drops this vial, like you were saying in the market idea, drops this vial, which then smashes on the floor. And it shows one of these Chinese people walking at an airport, suddenly feeling sick and then collapsing. And it shows passports being stamped throughout the world, which symbolizes that this thing is then spreading throughout the world. And within a few short months, the population of the world had decreased by so many billion or something like that. And that was like 40 plus years ago that TV series was out. And it was interesting that it showed the very title sequence that it was originating from China then. So it's like it's almost been planned for years, this thing, you know.
I mean, that was a big series. I mean, that ran certainly to more than one series. It was developed by Terry Nation, who any sort of TV geeks will know invented the Daleks. But the Daleks, of course, were effectively Nazis. That's what they represented. So maybe Terry Nation knew more than we knew. I mean, what I would say here, though, is I think if this, as some people have suggested, were the virus designed to depopulate the world, it's not working very well. And I think we should presume at the moment that unless it suddenly mutates and we all do start dropping down, that's not the fundamental aim here. I suspect the aim is more control rather than killing everybody off just yet. Now, some worry, of course, that the next thing would be they will introduce vaccines we all have to have, and then who knows what that will do. But at the moment, I do not think that that's the aim. But certainly world control, a more sustainable world. The green people, of course, many of them love this because it stopped flying. Extinction Rebellion are saying, well, this is what we wanted all along. And, you know, it will serve those that want to see us living in a much more controlled world. And it'll all be done in the name of making a better world, but whether it will actually respect human freedoms is another matter.
So,
Stephen, Stephen, who, using your contacts, who do you think is behind this, and what do you think the aims are? Have you got a different slant on Andy Thomas of where this is going?
Well, the first thing that just occurred to me while you guys were talking is that it might be possible to engineer a virus that they can control a mutation. So they could put out something that doesn't seem that bad, and then everybody kind of adjusts to that, and then they flip a little switch somehow or other. And, you know, there's something else. There's something else really interesting I saw that somebody suggested, and that was, they said that there was a school supposedly where they were going in and installing 5G when nobody was there. So that's kind of interesting, you know. But the other thing that strikes me about this particular virus is, if I'm not mistaken, it's stranger in the sense that people can have it and not know they have it. So there's a lot more potential contagion going on, you know. So it's dangerous that way too, because there's a lot of people out there that say, well, I'm fine, you know. So it's kind of a time bomb in that sense. So whether it was engineered or not, I don't know, but it's very convenient. That's for sure. And, you know, like in psychology, for example, I have a background in counseling. You know, when somebody comes in with a presenting problem, you kind of look for what the real problem is. You know, you look for, what is this accomplishing for the person, the symptoms, you know, and if you do that on a social level, you say, well, what is this thing accomplishing? You know, you work it backwards, and it's accomplishing a lot. So it's pretty suspicious in that sense, you know, because a lot of people are benefiting and not the right people.
Do you know, any of you guys, do you know if the common cold or the flu can be contracted by somebody anyway without any symptoms? I mean, is this a thing?
I suppose if that is the case, we simply don't know, because you wouldn't know, would you?
You wouldn't know.
So that's a good question, and
I've never had
finding out more about that.
Personally, I've never had a cold. I've always thought that, oh, I can beat this. and I take the zinc and I take the airborne and I do all the things and I get the blasted thing. I might delay it for 2 or 3 days. It's always the same cold. It's always just as bad as the last one. I've never had like a little tiny cold, you know, that I can think of. So in my personal experience, no, but I don't know about how it is for large numbers of people.
So, Stephen, you sent me a link to a thing that I think it was the Democrats in the US were having a go about President Trump shutting down the something to do with all this. As soon as he got in office, he shut down the pandemic department or something like that, and they were up in arms about it.
Yeah, his response, well, see, he just says whatever sounds good to him at the time. People try to figure him out, especially when he first got elected. They tried to make sense of his tweets. There's no sense. In other words, the riddle, the answer is there's no answer. So he just says whatever sounds good to him. And I mean, I've known people like that, you know, I kind of stay away from them. But at first he was saying this is no big deal, you know, don't take this seriously. We'll get over it fine. We don't need the tests, you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden now he's completely flopped over to the other side, and he's talking about how he's bragging about how he got on it quickly and, you know, cut off China, and, you know, and he's taking credit for all that. So there's no reading him, you know. Yeah, it's just frightening. I mean, but we've all been pretty scared for a long time over here.
Yeah.
What do you make? I'd be interested, Stephen, in your view. What do you make of President Trump saying everybody will be given $1,000? Do you think that's merely to win votes, or do you think it really could have a positive effect for those that, I mean, inevitably will suffer, you know?
When I was a teenager, there was a fellow running against Richard Nixon named George McGovern. He was a liberal, and I worked for him, worked for his campaign. And that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to give everybody in the United States $1,000, and everybody laughed at him. I remember that very well. I as far as now is concerned, it's kind of a wait and see thing. I'm kind of figuring out where I'm going to spend my $1,000, you know, but I'm not counting on it. You know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why he's doing that. You know, I don't trust any of his motives. The question is he doing it because he's under pressure to look good? Or is he, the suspicion is that he has a huge pot of money and he's going to dole out a little bit to the regular people, but a whole bunch is going to go to, you know, the big corporations and his friends and everything. So it's kind of an excuse to make a handout. So,
I mean, that may be, of course, one of the big agendas here, because we're already seeing companies starting to collapse. I think any small company that is even, you know, on the edge of extinction, they will be finished. But even modest-sized companies, we've just seen two go down here, Carphone Warehouse, Laura Ashley. These are well-known stores, you know, on the high streets. And I think, especially when the smaller airlines all go, what we are going to be left with are the bigger companies who they'll have enough left to pick up again, and we'll have far less choice. Prices will be a lot higher because they can charge them. And certainly I think flying around the world now in the way that we've seen, it is certainly going to get much, much harder now, or it will be much more expensive and therefore more elitist. But certainly at the other end of all of this, I think we're going to see the economy very, very different from what we have today. And interestingly, many of the policies that certainly the British government are bringing in are curiously socialist for a conservative government. And many think we're actually heading for a kind of a new socialism where it's more of a collective thing, which, you know, of course, many younger people seem to think is a good thing, that levels the playing field, and anybody having too much is not a good thing. Now, we all know there are people that probably do have too much money and too much power, but that can go to the other extreme where you wind up in something that's heading more for a communist type state. And I know I've read a lot of concerns being expressed about, well, that's where this is going to go, you know, when the virus has done its worst. So I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because Richard Branson is asking the government for something like £8 million or something to prop up Virgin Airlines or something like that. And they're always saying, hang on, he doesn't pay tax anyway. So why should he be asking for £7 or £8 million UK taxpayers' money to prop up his airline? Or he's been asking his staff now to work for nothing for the next 8 weeks or something.
Critical infrastructure. That's where money needs to go. Critical infrastructure. We're talking food supply, fuel supply, water, and electricity. That is the crucial
And
bit.
sewage.
Don't forget toilet paper.
Toilet
And
paper.
toilet paper, that goes in the sewage
Do
department.
you know what's ironic? Apparently, toilet paper is made in the UK.
Really?
What? All the world's toilet paper?
No. Like for the UK supply, a lot of it is made in the UK. So people are panicking, but essentially we can
get it easily. Yeah.
So we might run out of food, but not toilet roll in the long run, which is the opposite of what people think at the moment.
How have you guys found the supermarkets? I'll give you my experience. So far, I've gone in various different ones. I won't name the brands, but different supermarkets. I found people to be civil at the moment. I found a lot of shelves to be cleared out. However, I'm also seeing a lot of staff restocking, and I have a theory that I hope will play out. And that theory is that the super hoarders, these are the people that go with vans and literally wipe out an entire shelf and pay for it all in one go. Once they've stocked up enough for however many months, what do you guys think about? Hopefully that should kind of like slow things down, slow the demand down a little bit, so that people maybe who haven't got so much can now get it, because all of the super crazy hoarders, they've got their stuff piled away. Or do you think the super hoarders will carry on hoarding?
They're not going to be able to carry on, because it was just announced here today anyway, that supermarkets are going to basically restrict the sale of things to 2-3 items.
I've seen that.
And elderly people are being given the first 2 hours in many shops so they can get what they need. So I don't think that's actually going to be permissible. But I also think that give this a few more weeks. I think as long as things don't get so bad that lorry drivers can't operate and that the whole food supply chain goes down, if that doesn't happen, I think people will ease off, and I think they'll realize, a bit like Italy, which as yet we haven't seen shops run out of everything, people might calm down, and I think that the panic buying will subside just naturally, because you cannot keep going at this level, and with the new rules coming in, I don't think it would be even possible to keep doing that.
I think it's very important for people's mental health and for my mental health, because I've found this incredibly depressing and incredibly anxious, ridden with this. So I try and seek out positive things, and things that I've sought out that have been positive are, for instance, I mean, there's a few different countries saying they've got either cures or they've got, really functioning ways of dealing with this. So Australia has been trying anti-malaria and HIV drugs, which apparently is having a very good effect. I've seen Chinese doctors talking about very high doses of vitamin C and cutting out things like anti-inflammatories and ibuprofen and that kind of thing. And vitamin C, kind of like in regular high doses, apparently has been having quite a good effect there. We can point towards China. I don't like communist authoritarian regimes, but apparently their numbers are dropping of cases. South Korea as well, their numbers are dropping. I've even got something on this news channel, which is Live Science, and it says how one small Italian town cut coronavirus cases to 0 in just a few weeks. This gives me hope. That we can get through this. Again, if we've got critical infrastructure, we bed down, we self-isolate, then we can get through this. My big worry is if the virus then springs up again and you get a second wave or a third wave. What are your guys' takes on that?
I think you will get another wave, because that's the way these things work. But hopefully, by the time you get the later waves, we'll know how to deal with it. And I certainly think this will pass. Like I say, if it is the killer virus designed to wipe us all out, it's not very good. So I don't think that that's what's going on here. So yes, it will pass. If you look at what's going on though in Wuhan and China, I know there are some concerns that actually they were so draconian in their policies of stamping it out, that by doing it like that, if you then suddenly take all those controls away, of course, it will just start up again.
Yeah.
very likely the numbers will rise again in Wuhan for a while. But in the end, it'll even itself out. And in the end, some kind of natural immunity will come in because, I mean, that's what we do. You know, we're evolved to do that. So I wouldn't worry unduly that this is going to keep coming back and never stop. It will find a balance. And I think that, you know, what we're seeing here, perhaps what we should be more concerned with is how we react to it and what the social result of that will be at the other end.
Do you think there could be a backlash against Chinese goods, Chinese imports, Chinese politics? Because at the moment, for instance, in Britain, we're trying to construct this HS2 high-speed rail service too from London up to Birmingham, which supposedly cuts your train journey down by half an hour. And lots of people don't appear to really want it because it cuts through the countryside and you know, forces them to sell their homes and things like that. And I heard a few years ago that this was actually something that was financed by the Chinese government, and they seem to be involved in other kind of projects around the world, interestingly enough. So. And also we get loads of stuff like all the what is it, the Hawaii phones or something as well. All these kind of imports and tech stuff coming from China. Do you think that they've kind of done themselves a bit of a disservice now? We might actually rebel in some way by not buying Chinese products, and we might step up the protests against these things that, like this HS2, for instance.
Well, I mean, what I would say to that is China, they've been very clever. I mean, you can't knock them for this because over the last years, they've been investing in infrastructure around the world, especially in Africa, and of course, finding their way into like the British security systems through Huawei and that. Now, Trump has kicked Huawei out of the American equation. I mean, Stephen, you might want to say something about that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, the Chinese have enormous influence now around the world, and they did it quite legitimately. And of course, many think that part of, this is one accusation, part of the effect of the virus, whether deliberate or accidental, could be to actually weaken their economy so that sort of seemingly unstoppable force actually is not unstoppable. And a lot of people think maybe somebody within America caused the virus to be released in China to destroy their economy and all of this. But what you can say is, I mean, yeah, China are very influential in the world and militarily. I mean, they have enormous influence now in the southern Pacific Ocean, and they're so entrenched, there's pretty much not much that we can do about it now. So, you know, certainly if they were weakened on the world stage, a number of countries would sigh, a sigh of relief. But equally, I don't think that that is going to happen. I don't think China has been weakened on that level economically. And I think they will make a return because they have put so many tendrils out there and they did it legitimately. And maybe other countries should have followed suit. And they didn't. We watched this happen. We knew that China was investing in Africa, for instance, to a huge degree, and nobody tried to compete with that. So there we are. You know, it is something which has happened quite naturally.
I'd like to bring in something weird. This is because we are the Paranormal Peep Shows. So
I was going to bring in something weird at some point. So yeah, you go for
one
it first.
too. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is where we get woo-woo. I don't know if you guys are getting any reports of people seeing unusual lights in the sky. Now, apparently, Venus is very close to Britain. And Britain, what am I talking about? My mind is not.
That's very that is amazing.
Venus is very, well, technically it's close to Britain. Venus is quite close to planet Earth, so it's very bright in the sky at the moment. It's not that. So I'm going to read out a couple of things from people that are quite interesting. So there's a group called Elsenham and Henham Newsline, which is near Stansted Airport. So these are people who know what planes look like. They know what air traffic look like. So it ain't that. Someone said, anyone else notice a bright flash looking like a shooting star flashing 3 times and about 5 seconds apart over Elsenham? Happened about 10 minutes ago. The replies are things like, no, but I heard a story about it 3 times in a row. Airport confirmed unidentifiable object. Someone put, I saw something, thought it was someone with a torch in the garden and sent my husband out to investigate. On a completely different note, somebody from Stevenage, this is somebody who I know personally and somebody who's not a bullshitter. He says, won't lie, we have had a star above the area for about 3 weeks and it moves. Not a lot, but it doesn't stay in the place all night. And people have seen blue beams of light come out of it to the next star along. Definitely weird shit. Saw it 3 weeks ago and just looked at it for about half an hour. It lines up with the next star and then slowly moves back to its starting point and repeat. Is this a coincidence that this is happening with the coronavirus? Could the coronavirus be, I mean, God, could it be woo-woo? Could it be ETs doing this? Are ETs here to save us? Is it ETs that are about to invade us? Is it that the governments know this is about to happen with ET contact, think the people are going to freak out and release a virus to get us to stay at home and not panic? Over to you guys.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, because I was thinking that, everyone's panicking now that this virus and buying toilet roll and, hand sanitizers and things like that. And yet only a few short years ago, we were asking for disclosure. And, people said, no, we won't panic over disclosure. We're all ready for it and things like that. But you actually wonder now whether we really are ready for UFO disclosure, because if we're, going to get this virus and feel a bit peaky for a few weeks and we're panicking with toilet roll and hand sanitizers. So if somebody says, yes, ET is here and, they come in with this, that, and the other, I think we're going to get a lot more than just toilet rolls and hand sanitizers.
Yeah.
No way you can get a roll of toilet paper at that point. I mean.
Nah.
Maybe
have you guys heard of any reports of friends or anything of seeing anything unusual in the sky? Any ET, like extra UFO ET behavior at the moment?
I mean, I would make a wider point here, because, I mean, sightings like that are going on all the time, of course, as we know. I do think, though, that when you get big world events, and what's going on now, I mean, is unprecedented in our living memory. Okay, this level of disruption, it puts people into an apocalyptic frame of mind, as it would. And of course, I mean, I'm getting sent emails and reading websites saying, well, this is it, it's the book of Revelation. You get the religious side come in, but you also are getting people saying, well, maybe this is kind of the final crescendo of all the changes prophesied to come after 2012 and all of this. So I do think that if something like that does happen, it might in fact be quite normal, if you want to call UFOs normal, but that we are now putting it into a wider, deeper context that makes us feel that very momentous events are going on, which of course on one level they are, and therefore we add it all together, and it's a human nature thing. We see a bigger pattern to that. And listen, who knows? I mean, maybe it is the end of days and all the rest of it. I doubt it. I think it's a confluence of events, and people will then see anything extraordinary as potentially part of that, because everything else around it is also extraordinary. So it's all going to get mixed together somewhere down the line.
There's the other side of it too. As long as we're all freaked out, you might as well do disclosure too. I mean,
That's right.
What the heck? Yeah.
Yes. I can imagine like Boris or Trump kind of like sneaking it in. It's like, okay, so we're going to have.
Oh, by the way,
45 days of quarantine. We're coming up with a vaccine. There's, we're going to make sure that the food distribution is getting to supermarkets. There's aliens in the sky. We're about to be invaded.
Have a nice day.
The way to say it is actually to say, hang on, the aliens have solved this problem and they've given us the vaccine, and that's why we go with open arms, and that stops the panic. You see,
I like it.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Because I mean,
if they can shut down a nuclear facility,
yeah,
I mean, it's pretty interesting. Yeah,
they can certainly shut down toilet roll making facilities, I'm sure.
They probably don't need it. So.
There's another aspect of this. You guys probably know about Project Bluebeam, don't you? This kind of fake alien invasion. So there's that on the cards as well.
Well, I thought that when you mentioned blue beams, funnily enough. Yeah, I mean, when you look at, Neil, I mean, you just touched on this, when you look at how easily people can completely throw their normal lives up and panic, this does make you realize it wouldn't take much to convince the public that something really huge was occurring. And if anybody out there is watching, doesn't know what Project Bluebeam is, it is an alleged attempt to create 3D holographic images in the sky, and some fear that the authorities authorities would try to make us think that there were aliens coming so they could then take control again in the name of protecting us all. And who knows, maybe that technology does exist. But yeah, certainly it has now been shown, and let's hope they don't misuse this, it has now been shown just how, with the smallest flick of a finger, you can smash the whole of our society into panic, into completely different domino patterns that anybody expected even just a month ago. So now, yeah, who knows what they might try it with. And it's certainly something I think we do need to be very wary of.
It's so surreal. It's just like overnight. It's just like another reality. If you think what your lives were like before Christmas, and now we're here, and this is just mental. So let's take best case scenario. Let's say that the world manages to either get a genuine vaccine, not one that's going to kill us, but let's say, or a cure or a pill or something like that, or measures that bring the numbers down. Okay, so at that point, and things free up a little bit, travel is back on the cards, and that kind of thing. A lot of people would have lost their jobs at this stage. What do you think is going to happen? Are people going to rehire? Is there going to be like a boom after this extreme bust? What do you think is going to happen?
That's what President Trump is claiming. I'm pretty suspicious about that because, once you've been hit that hard, I don't know, that you can bounce back like that. I think it's unrealistic.
You could come back in, of course, and say, well, all our debts are all completely screwed up and things like that. So the only solution is, of course, problem reaction solution is to provide a new type of one world currency.
You're cracking up, Neil.
The only solution is to provide a one world currency. This is what they might say.
Yeah.
Well, I think what is very clear is that the economy will never be quite the same after this. And you can bet your life it will not be used to our advantage. That much is for sure. I'm hearing, by the way, I'm hearing my voice coming back at me here.
I'm hearing this also.
We're getting some lag time issues.
Have you got earphones on, Andy?
I haven't, no.
That's why. If you put, because we're coming through your speaker, and then it's feeding back into your mic, and it causes a feedback loop.
Well, how about now?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, that's better.
I can hear you.
Cool. Okay, I think it's just the volume is just up a bit too much. So sorry, what was you saying, Andy Thomas, just before that?
I think the economy, will not be the same after this. I definitely think there will be a lot of hardship. You may well see not only recession, but depression. But then others will rise from this. And as we've already mentioned, certain companies will do very well. The people that have lots of money will still have lots of money. But I think it will restructure things. Now, I know some people are hoping for like a new socialist revolution. And I mentioned earlier on, some of the solutions coming in, they are surprisingly collectivist. Certainly here for a conservative government, but maybe some of these things will be necessary as it will be sold to us to bring everything back online. But I do think, a lot of people are going to really struggle to get through the next few months. They're not going to get paid. Their jobs might not be there at the other end of it. Yeah, you don't just walk away from that and everything be normal. In the end, we will adjust because that's what we do. But I don't think we should underestimate that. And, as I keep saying, I think that does play into the hands of things like Agenda 21, people that would have us contained, that would like us all squashed together in kind of very definite conglomerates, easy to control, people not going out as much as they did. So I think these are things we need to be very wary of. And we can only hope that actually the human spirit will demand more than that. Actually, after the necessary restrictions, it will want to burst out of that perhaps more quickly than it might. But I do think, public life, the way we conduct our lives, is going to be effective for a very long while.
How about purchasing online? Right now, I'm buying everything online because I'm not sure. I've had a little tightness in my chest. I want to be sure I don't infect anybody if I've got a real mild case. So I'm doing everything online, and I'm also doing stuff at home. So imagine I'm not the only one, because I get on there and try to buy like a little bottle of alcohol, and it says out of stock. And finally you can find one. So there's a lot of people trying to buy online, and it's not just grocery shelves, it's online. So the question is, are people going to buy more online, and our brick and mortar stores going to go under after this? You think The
I
habits have
definitely
changed.
think so. I definitely think so. And also, cinemas are all closed, theatres are closed. I would imagine the sales of big screen TVs are going up by the day. And companies like Netflix and all that, they love it because it is true. More people will stay in to entertain themselves, and they probably won't come out of that habit at the other end of it. So, yeah, I think the high street, as we would call it here, high street stores absolutely are going to suffer. And I mean, the interesting thing is that there's so many people now trying to buy online that at the moment they're finding the infrastructure isn't there to support it. So online sort of supermarket orders, they're having to say now there's a 2-3 week waiting limit because they haven't got the food to actually take people. So
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
tempted now online. But although we're not perhaps ready for that level yet, it's shown now there is a market for it. But again, do you then wind up with a lot of people all sitting at home all day, nicely contained, nicely controlled, under constant surveillance, which actually suits the powers that be, rather than us wandering around being free and just getting up to the things we've all been getting up to until fairly recently. And I do think this more contained world will be one of the things that will remain at the other end of this.
There's another thing that could happen is a huge population explosion in a few months.
Yeah, I've heard this as well.
You know, that could
Maybe.
swamp us.
Yeah. Now, the downside, you talk about Netflix there, is that obviously Netflix and Amazon and all these other companies that make these films for home viewing, they can't actually get together and actually produce these films because they obviously need quite a big crew to produce, say, one Netflix film. And I've been getting emails through because I work in the broadcasting industry about certain events that aren't happening this year. They've had to cancel big broadcasting shows. And so, for instance, a crew of 1,000, say, for a feature film won't be able to make that feature film at the moment. So I think we're going to have a lull for the next 6 months, certainly of production of films and TV.
Well, what you're going to see is, I think, a big promotion of what they will now classify as classic material.
Yes.
Enjoy our archive classic material, and
Yeah.
they'll sell it. And they're already doing that because BBC today have said that because they've had to lay off the cast of EastEnders, which is a big soap opera here, that they're not going to broadcast so many episodes. But don't worry, we've got lots of repeats of classic episodes of other series to show you. So that's already happening, and of course it will be sold as a marvelous thing.
Yeah,
there's also the issue of TV channels where you've got adverts. Well, those adverts will need to sell products, but how can they sell products if there's no factories producing those products and no jobs to create those products? There's so many knock-on effects with this, isn't there?
I think it must be factored in that this can only go on for so long. And my suspicion is they know you can't keep this going indefinitely, but they will make hay while the sun shines and use it to the best of their advantage. And then they'll reboot everything in the nick of time. They've got to, they know that. And even if there were still virus cases going around, people would just be encouraged to take the risk because otherwise everything will collapse forever. And I don't think that that's the end game here, but I do think control is the end game. So, on one level, that's good because I don't think everything will completely collapse. But on the other level, yeah, once again, it serves rather dubious agendas.
On the positive side, we lose EastEnders, which is great.
You lose an episode a week of it for now.
Yeah. Okay. But at the end of it, they'll certainly come out with some interesting statistics of behavior patterns, buying habits, behavior patterns of psychology, and all sorts of things. And I wonder if the security services will be reeling in all these statistics and information for their own agendas later on, because it certainly gives a pattern of human behavior when panic strikes. And also the other side of that coin is that these terrorists are encouraged not to go to these areas where this coronavirus is now for fear they might catch it. These are the suicide terrorists, of course. Doesn't make such a big bang as it used to. And we're not discussing Brexit either.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, here's an interesting thing because a few people have said, well, that's it. You can't do Brexit now. And of course, they've had to suspend some of the, discussions for a while, inevitably. But funnily enough, I think it might actually have the opposite effect. So if you're a Remainer hoping this will, stop Brexit, I actually don't think it will. And one of the things that I think was quite interesting was how quickly the Schengen zone, which is the zone where you're supposed to have universal free movement across the EU, how quickly when the virus kicked in, that all ended. and suddenly it was every country for itself, and all the borders went up, and all this collectivism suddenly ended. And what I thought was fascinating also, of course, is that, you know, we here in Britain, we've sort of set the bar, we've walked away, and now people are saying, actually, should we be, you know, so reliant on other countries? You know, for food especially, we've just heard recently we only produce about 51% of our own food, and we're very reliant on imports from the EU. And of course, now more people are saying, rather than get closer to the EU again, what they're saying is we need to be more self-sufficient. We now need to look at the way our economy works and produce more again, like we used to. So actually, far from sort of bringing us back into the fold, I think it might well drive an agenda of being separate and all countries standing on their own 2 feet. So if there are any Remainers out there that were hoping this would change things, I suspect it won't. Indeed, it could have the opposite effect.
Now, here's another factor: is the refugees. You know, I mean, what do you guys think about the refugee situation right now?
The refugees. Sorry, Andy's just left for some reason. I think he's
okay.
dropped out. But
Okay.
we'll carry on. We can carry on. I'm sure he'll come back in. I'm sure
I mean, those people are gonna, if there's anything to be caught in the concentrated camps that they're in, or in the situations they're in, they're going to get it. And so then what do you do? Do you isolate them, you know, permanently, or, you know, what?
Well, that's it. It's a very difficult one. I mean, I was just thinking also the idea of crime and things like that, the normal criminal activity that takes place in all these countries, you know, presumably crime will drop because they don't want to get it themselves either. It's like the same sort of thing with the suicide.
I've lost your signal, by the way. I can't hear any of you suddenly.
Oh, well, I'm here, but I'm just keeping quiet to wait and see how it.
Oh, now, Stephen, I can hear
out.
you. Andy's gone, and Neil, you've gone into a kind of a immovable mode.
He's meditating.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, well, hold on.
There's Andy's back.
Andy, you're back. Can you hear us?
I'm having connection issues.
Right. Neil is also, I think, having connection issues.
We'll pause it because Neil's the one recording it. So,
Yeah.
Okay. It still says it's recording, curiously.
Yeah, I see it up in the upper left here.
Yeah. Neil, are you back with us?
I am. Again, it dropped out, so apologies for that.
Same for me. Where were we? Sorry, guys.
Just going to stop my camera. I was just talking about the fact that terrorists and things like that, and crime rate, criminals as such, the activity as criminals has probably gone down a little bit over these past few weeks because obviously they don't want to catch it. So they would be perhaps laying low. There'd be less drug deals, less burglaries, presumably less theft of cars or whatever may be the popular criminal activity of the day. So, yeah, again, another statistic. It's interesting how these things change human behaviors.
I mean, that's true for now, of course. But I mean, I think if things were to get worse, and they could get a little bit worse before they get better, you might then see a spike in crime, especially if people who suddenly haven't got any money, if their legitimate jobs have gone, might suddenly see it as quite reasonable to go and take something from somebody else. You could certainly see, I think, a rise in robbery. But also, I think it depends on how on edge the population are. I think you could see a rise in violence. And I mean, Stephen, I mean, obviously, you're in a country with many more guns than we have. Does that worry you? Is that something?
Oh, absolutely.
You think could be a problem?
Yeah, I'm in a fairly safe part of the country, but it does worry me. And gun sales are going up here. So,
sure.
Yeah. So,
well, now they've got $1,000 extra each.
And they're letting people out of prison now. So I don't know which ones they're letting out.
In the UK, have you guys heard that? And
I haven't heard that. No,
yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, I don't know if it's accurate, but apparently they're trying to release what they call sort of low-level criminals.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. Yes.
Guys, I want to bring in something that's may. I don't know, it might help us or it may help the authorities. I'm pretty sure they're going to be on it already. But the 1918 Spanish flu, the Spanish influenza. So the world was pummeled by the First World War. Millions of people died. Young men, fit men died in the First World War. To compound issues even further, just as they were trying to recover from that, they get hit by the Spanish influenza, which apparently was a lot worse. I don't know if you've seen the numbers on it, but millions died. 18
million, I think it was.
So but you know, we're here. So they recovered, and they went through the 1920s depression and the 1930s Second World War. But let's focus on the Spanish influenza for the moment, if we can. Do you guys know, because I need to research this, I've not looked into it, what precautions or what measures did they do to contain or cope with the Spanish influenza, and what happened with it? Did it come back in waves? Did it die out? What's your guys' take on that?
Well, I was actually interestingly, I was watching this thing with Bill Gates, which he produced about 5 years ago. I think it was one of those TEDx talks, and he was talking about in the introduction about a few years ago, it was the threat of nuclear weapons, and we're spending so much on Trident missiles and things like that. He says, but the next war will be a pandemic war on germs and things like that, like flus and things. He was talking flus. He wasn't talking exactly coronavirus, but it's near enough. And he was saying that how we will have to cope with it. And he pointed out this Spanish influenza thing from 1918. And he showed a map of the world, and literally the whole map colored red where it had all reached. And he said the thing is, it reached those things. But he says today's world, we're much more prepared to deal with these things because we've got better communication systems. We've got information on our phones and things like that. Don't do this, don't do that, don't go out there, or go there to get this. So there's a lot more, and there's better health systems in place. So he said, he gave a figure roughly in the region of like about $300 trillion could be set aside to tackle this, as a kind of, that was a ballpark figure he gave from 5 years ago. So it's interesting that, he was talking about that will be the next war on humanity. And really it's almost come true if it has indeed. But yeah, that he was talking about the technology will win, as it were.
Do you know if they did do lockdowns in 1918? Was that a thing?
I don't think they could have done, because it spread throughout the world so quickly within a space of about 6 months, from what I recall him saying in the video, 6 months to a year. And obviously, we weren't getting around so quick then. There weren't planes taking loads of people. There weren't ocean cruises. But there was obviously, exports going from one country to another, ships that might take 6 weeks to reach one continent.
And a lot of soldiers returning, of course.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that spread it so quickly, as much as it was.
Yeah.
It's just, while you're on, obviously there are many conspiracy versions out there which worry about the motivation of Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. No, on the surface, he does seem to want to eradicate disease and do wonderful things, but, inevitably there will always be people with a darker vision of that. But it's just worth mentioning, we haven't mentioned yet that, of course, just a few months ago, in I think the autumn of 2019, at Johns Hopkins University, they did a sort of a war game type thing where they imagined a pandemic occurring and how it might spread and what we should do. And many of the things that they postulated there seem to have come true, just a few months later. And of course, inevitably, some say, well, did they know more than they were letting on? It's an interesting thing. Something was bubbling up in the collective here. And I think absolutely, we perhaps have taken for granted that we're all sort of healthier now and nothing can affect us anymore. Whether that's been taken advantage of, or whether that just really is, hubris, and we all forgot that this is always a risk, I don't know. But now here we are, faced once again with the reality that we are organisms, we're flesh and blood, and we are vulnerable. But let's hope darker minds haven't also noticed that and are trying to use it against us.
I'm just looking at the 1918 Spanish flu. It lasted a year, 1918 to 1919. 50 million people.
Oh, right. I thought it was 18 million. Crikey.
50 million people. I'm looking at the graphs. It shows that social distancing seemed to be the thing. So I can't quite see, because I'm reading it quite quickly. I can't quite see if there was actual quarantines, but people were distancing themselves, and some cities were kind of like closing out other people coming in. For instance, there does seem to be that's going on. It looks like, from what I can gather, Minnesota, I think, is where it came from. It's talking about that Minnesota is where it was first identified, I think it is. So it might have come in, hence Spanish flu. I don't know if that's Latino Spanish or whether that's actually from Spain, but in America, it looks like Minnesota was kind of looking at it. It's a lot to read, but 50 million is quite a big. I can't quite work out if that's 50 million killed or whether it's 50 million infected. I can't quite work out on that.
I mean, if you want to go back even further in time, some reading that I recommend that I've been doing at the moment to try to get some perspective on where we are now is to read Daniel Defoe's book, which is called Journal of the Plague Year. Now, Daniel Defoe, of course, wrote Robinson Crusoe, so he's writing in the early 1700s, but he had grown up and he was a child in London when they had one of the great plagues of 1665, and that took out an awful lot of people. And although, okay, he's writing having put together a lot of people's experiences as well as his own memories, nonetheless, he gives a pretty chilling account of what was happening back then, which, you know, makes you realize what's happening now is nothing by comparison. But the point of it is, and why I would recommend people go and find that book, you know, it's Penguin Classic, you'll find it easily, is that everything that's happening now, people's reactions to it, authorities' responses to it, it's actually the same. You know, the superstitions around it, the fake news around it, all the things we all think are new, that they really are not. And you can see exactly the same patterns going on there. And, you know, we should always learn from history. And if it's a comfort to read something like that, you at least realize, you know, it isn't just us, and it was once a hell of a lot worse. And if you want to go back before that, of course, you get to the Black Death in the 1300s, which wiped out 2/3 of the European population. So, you know, we're on currently 1% to 3 to 4% max death rate, which is awful, but it's still not that. So, you know, looking at the bright side, if you want to find one from that, you know, we are not going back to those kinds of realms.
But this is it.
Let's hope we don't.
I mean, we've got, you know, medical research centres that apparently say that they've kind of found the genetic code mapping of the coronavirus that would have taken years, a couple of decades or so, but they're now doing it in maybe weeks or maybe a month. So, you know, we have, as you say, Andy, we have got the technology to kind of deal with this. Can you imagine being in the plague period and the medieval periods where literally there's nothing people can do except put posies in their noses? You know, the plague doctors with their beaks, they used to put rose petals. They thought that could kind of stop the disease. They had no clue about the rats and no clue about the fleas. So at least we've got medical knowledge. What it comes down to, Andy, and you'll probably agree with this, is yeah, but what if this is planned by the people, you know, the dark hat scientific community, the biological weapons people who see this as a culling exercise? This is where it gets a bit shady and a bit concerning.
Like I said, though, my gut feeling here is that's not what we're dealing with. I think it is more likely that if it was created, and I mean, we shouldn't forget that, you know, biosafety level lab 4 or whatever it's called in Wuhan, I mean, it is a place where they do study these kinds of viruses and they look at them as a bio weapon. And we know research goes on around the world. So we've talked about a possible dropping of the flask and all of that. But, you know, it is possible this wasn't intentional. But there are also concerns there, of course, about some of the cures. And something that slightly worried me yesterday is on BBC Radio 4, they were saying, well, now they might have a vaccine. And whereas in years past, they would have taken around 18 years to bring it in, they're going to bypass the animal testing bit and just start immediately testing it on humans. And maybe we'll get it within 18 months. And I'm thinking, hang on, if it normally takes 18 years and you're going to do this in 18 months, are you sure you're not leaving out some crucial science?
It makes you wonder.
A lot of people will be very, very worried about that.
It makes you wonder if they didn't have it already, if it's that fast.
Yes, that is also an interesting thought.
Neil, how are we doing for break?
Yeah, well, we've been on about coming up to about 55 minutes. I was just wanting to point out that this is something that I saw on something today. National Emergency Mortuary Arrangement Procurement. This is something the government is considering bringing or has brought in. I'm not quite sure. This is the UK government, where basically, but mortuary arrangement. It sounds like that their procurement is if they're going to take over buildings. That's what it suggests to me. Is if they're going to take over large buildings like schools or meeting halls or group rooms or something like that, to taken over by the government to sort of use as mortuary places, because they're expecting that they're going to run out of mortuary slabs at the local hospital or at the local undertakers or whatever. So that's something that I've seen under a freedom of information release that someone asked about, and they've got that through National Emergency Mortuary Arrangement Procurement.
Well, they've certainly got lots of empty buildings now, empty cinemas, empty schools from this week coming up here. So, I mean, they could. I mean, to be fair, when there was the bird flu scare, which didn't really come to much, I know they looked into that there. Well, you know, how many bodies would they need to store? How many body bags would they need to order? And indeed, they did order in a lot, which happily weren't needed back then. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, they have no choice but to do that, because if there is the risk of this getting bigger, I mean, they have to cover themselves. I'm sure that would be true.
There's a film called Pandemic that I watched not too terribly long ago. I forget when it was produced, but they were using ice skating rinks for the bodies, just laying them out, you know. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a way of keeping them cool, because it does say, this is another thing. It says one of the things on the list here: managing the deceased in a dignified way. So rather than just throwing them into a heap of a great big hole in the ground or something, it sounds like they're planning to do something. You know, they get
line them up at right angles. That's nicer, you know.
I think they also have to kind of like prepare for the worst case scenario as well. So I would imagine, I mean, I'm not a government civil servant, but I would imagine they would have different scenarios: best case scenario, what's probably going to happen, and then worst case scenario. So they've got a plan for the worst case scenario.
There was something you talked about earlier with regard to the 1918 flu and the earlier ones. My question is our infrastructure so much more interconnected and complicated and complex that we're actually more vulnerable? If it goes on for a year, let's say we go on for a year like this, are we actually in a worse position in terms of social breakdown than people were in the past?
Probably.
Possibly so. Yeah, possibly so, because of course, life was simpler back then and it was probably easier to pick up. Now, I mean, I imagine companies that are going down, they rely on a lot of technology and, computer systems. If all that's offline for a long while, that's an awful lot more they've got to reboot. And our lives are so much more interconnected. And of course, now so many things are going to bring down other things at the same time. Yeah, it could actually be harder to pick it all up. We will, because that's what we do. But yeah, I don't think it will be easy. Whereas before, when plague was perhaps more common, people, they cried, they mourned the same way as anybody would today, but they shrugged and got on with it because that was the way it was. And, it hadn't as such changed too much. Although the only thing I would say to that is after the Black Death, one of the interesting social results that it had was that it left the peasants in a much stronger position because there weren't so many of them left to do the work, and they were now able to ask an awful lot more money for the work they did. And of course, that's actually what triggered a suppression of the peasantry in Britain from King Richard II, which then in turn triggered the peasants' revolt. But yeah, these things can have huge social effects, and sometimes it does elevate people in society. So it will be interesting to see who the winners and the losers will be here. But you can bet your life that the normal winners will probably still be the winners.
Hi, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show, where you find us talking with Stephen Sakellarios, Andy Thomas and Andy Chaplin, and myself, Neil Geddes-Ward, and we're talking about the coronavirus, which is currently affecting the world over. And in part one, we were talking about the various conspiracy theory ideas that are going around and various measures that the governments are trying to do to curtail the spread of this virus, and even does a virus exist and things like that. So I thought in part two, we touched slightly on part one about the woo side of things, as we call it, where UFOs are allegedly watching us from afar. Maybe they won't land because they might catch something. But on the psychic and mental mediumship side of things, a few of us have been discussing during the break our experiences on that level. And I thought I'd just share a dream that I had about a week ago where I was... I sighted this coffin to the side of me. A kind of a funeral procession was going along, a carriage drawn with horses. It's in my peripheral vision in the dream. And there's lots of people to my left who were looking really sad. I don't know if they were actually attending the funeral or not, but they looked really despondent, really down in the dumps and things like that. And I was saying to them, maybe it's from a higher self perspective or just from my conscious self within the dream, I don't know. I was saying, look, I know this looks bad. It will get worse. but don't worry, will come out the other side of it, even though I was shown death on the right-hand side of me in this funeral procession. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I have had dreams in the past where things have come true, and some still have to yet unfold. So I won't go into those at this point. But Stephen, you was talking about some dreams that you've had to do with this.
Yeah, these were many years ago, and most of my dreams are very confused and unrealistic and so on. But these really stood out as being very vivid and very realistic dreams. So the first one relates to something that I think we were talking about earlier. I was in a place looking up in the sky, and they were projecting, I guess with lasers, they were projecting advertisements in the sky. And we're talking like 25, 30, 40 years. I don't know how long it's been, like 30, 40 years ago, I had this dream. So it was like totally unrealistic at that time. But then the other one I had, which was somewhat more recent, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm in a big open area, and there's lines of people standing, and they're just standing, and they're getting ready to go on transport planes. And they're saying to each other, they're stunned, and they're saying, I can't believe the United States is gone, that there's no more United States. And these were Chinese transport planes that these people were waiting to get on. They were going to be taken somewhere. They were like, it was like they were being helped, rescued basically. Yeah. And that was, that's like 30 years ago. I had that dream, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I can't say it's really prescient, but I can say it was different. Definitely.
And Annie Chaplin, you run tuned in events where you gather psychics together to do readings in public places. And of course, public places generally at the moment in the UK are off limits, like pubs, clubs, halls, that kind of thing, where people are getting together. And that is predominantly where you were getting together with your psychics and mediums to do readings on people. So obviously that's taken a bit of a nosedive at the minute. I mean, how are you coping with that, and how are your medium colleagues and psychic colleagues coping with that?
So it's the old joke, isn't it? Cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been devastating, absolutely devastating. I've worked so hard creating posters and banners and organizing with venues. All of the pub managers are depressed. They're all kind of really down because they know the knock-on effect of this. And all of the time and effort arranging it, I've had to go down and basically take down all of the banners, all of the posters. It's just horrendous. It's a, what's the word? It's a legitimate question to ask, did we see it coming, and why didn't we see it coming? There's two things I would say to that. Generally speaking, with psychics and mediums, generally is the way we kind of view somebody's life, and we view a timeline for them, and we try and tune into the positive. We try and tune into the positive aspects or things coming towards people, or even global situations that are on the positive side. So we don't tend to kind of like look at the negative side. Now, there are kind of like some soothsayers and some psychics and mediums, etc., who do pick up kind of like the negative side, maybe Nostradamus, Madame Blavatsky, things like that. So there are some people who do that, but generally speaking, my lot, and certainly me, we aim for the positive, and because of that, we don't really pick up on the negative. I think it is possible, if you wanted to be like a negative person, to pick up on negative things, but you'd have to focus in on what those on negativity and negative things coming your way. But I think what that would do is bring a lot of anxiety, a lot of kind of worry, and it would make your life quite kind of depressed, really, focusing on the negative. So that's why I think we didn't really see it coming, generally speaking. However, what I'd add to that is there are a lot of mediums and psychics out there that did pick up stuff like this, and certainly what you'd call the woo-woo community. A lot of people in the woo-woo community were talking about a bank crash. They were talking about Agenda 21, New World Order, possibly even like an alien takeover. They were talking about stocking up on food. They were talking about I don't know if global pandemic is the right word, but certainly a really tough time for humanity. And there's this word ascension. A lot of them are talking about humanity waking up to like a more spiritually minded way of viewing life, and working towards an ascension, which I think in practical terms means getting rid of the old kind of greedy ways and kind of the destruction of the planet, and kind of actually going in more of a productive way. Interestingly as well, I'll add to that, it's not just the psychics and the mediums, but you've got people who are alien abductees, and when they get taken up, they get shown these bizarre images of the kind of like the world in real crisis, and humanity needs to wake up, and we're destroying our planet, and we need to kind of like really kind of find our divinity and find our spirituality. So you've got the alien aspect crossing over with the psychic mediumship aspect. So yeah, funnily enough, as we were kind of like talking, I've got a little group of my elite psychic, kind of like the psychic Illuminati on Facebook, of my elite readers. But it's less kind of like rolled up trouser legs and funny handshakes. We just kind of like talk about stuff away from the public within our own little psychic group. And I'm asking them what their take is on that. And I've only asked that 6 minutes ago. So we'll see. I'm going to see what they say. One of my favorite psychics, I won't name her, but she's a traditional Irish gypsy medium, but lovely person, lovely lady. She says this. She says, she's been told by spirit that this is a resting period, a timeout, a short period. She reckons 3 to 4 weeks, things will start getting back a little bit more to normal. She reckons, and I hope she's right, she says things will be bigger and better than ever before. And the main message is that this is a resting period, a timeout period, a time for kind of people to reflect on themselves and the world at large, and humanity to reflect on itself. And the important thing, and I would reiterate this, is to stay positive. The moment people freak out and go mad and start going like in a negative spin, that's when we'll have the collapse of society. I don't want us to get to that stage. I think we need to work together. We need to work as a community. And we need to sort this out when we come out of the end of it.
Andy Thomas, do you have any is there any kind of psychics that you can recollect that might predict this type of thing? Like Madame Blavatsky was one of the names. I'm thinking Edgar Casey or anything like that. Anything you might know?
Well, I'm very surprised we haven't yet mentioned Sylvia Brown.
Oh yes.
Oh, so Sylvia Brown. Now, I have to be frank, I didn't know that much about her before these recent times. But anyway, so she was, I presume, a clairvoyant, somebody that had visions and prophecies of the future. And, you know, as ever, the skeptics, of course, criticize her. But one of her prophecies was that a huge virus would suddenly appear in 2020, very precise prophecy, and that it would be, of course, pretty devastating to begin with. But here's the good news. She also predicted that it would vanish almost as soon as it came, mysteriously, and would end very suddenly. And it would then come back in 10 years' time after that. Wow. And then it would go again, but then that would be the end of it. So it's quite uncanny, isn't it? That, you know, indeed, here we are in 2020 and this virus arises. So a lot of people are really hoping she was right, and that actually it will just suddenly vanish. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, I think certainly that is a very uncannily accurate one.
Interesting, because there's been this pages of this book that's been going around on Facebook. I think the author is Dean Coots or something like that.
Edge of Darkness or Eyes of Darkness.
Yeah, someone said it's fake. I haven't looked into it, but someone's reproduced the pages of this alleged paperback, printed in about 1984, 85, I can't remember the year now. And it has a chapter very much like the Sylvia Brown thing, where it says in the year 2020, it was a novel apparently, in the 2020, a Chinese virus will be released onto the world with rather like flu type symptoms, and it'll, you know, wipe out a lot of people, etc., etc. And it's very, very similar. It's almost as if Sylvia Brown read it out the book herself.
Maybe she did.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we haven't mentioned the Resident Evil prophecies. So the computer game Resident Evil. Now, that had a company in the story of Resident Evil, which I believe was supposed to be in the East, and that releases the virus, which then sort of wipes out mankind and turns half of them into zombies, the usual thing. But interestingly, the logo of the company in that game, it's like looking down on top of an umbrella, is the same logo with different colors but the same design as the logo of the alleged lab that might have released the virus in Wuhan.
Yeah.
And there's no question it's the same logo. Now, make of that what you will. Maybe total coincidence, but obviously many people think that's a very big coincidence. So there we are. Even computer games can prophesy, it would seem.
The company you're talking about, Andy, is RLSW Shanghai Roilan Baohu San Biotech Limited. That's the one with the umbrella.
Well done. Very
It's
good.
exactly the same, but
That's
It
the
is the
address
same.
that we
Different
can write
colours,
to.
but the
Andy.
same design.
green and white, and the umbrella corporation is white and red.
So that's the address to write to, ladies and gentlemen, to get your free hat and pen.
And an umbrella.
And toilet roll.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting. All these predictions, like we had the Survivor program from 1975, which had the title sequence of the Chinese gentleman, the scientist, dropping the flask, and now this Resident Evil game and things like that, and these books and things like that. Everything seems to be focused in China as if we've known this for years, and we were just waiting for this to open up. And it's like it almost comes as no surprise that it's come out of China. Is that something in our psyche, maybe, that we're just, tuning into?
Yes, because I know some people say, well, okay, there we are. That's the ruling elite seeding their signs and symbols and letting us know well in advance what they're doing, which is, of course, what many believed about 9/11, because there's a number of strange things, record covers with references to 9/11, banknotes and all of that. So it's possible, although I was on a record cover, but anyway, that's another story. But what I think is perhaps more likely, I mean, if you look at the experiments which have been done with presentiment and people like Dean Radin and all that kind of work, it does look like we all do know what is about to happen in the future, sometimes seconds, sometimes hours before they happen. The random number generator experiments, the Global Consciousness Project, where computers have been running around the world for years, just recording random numbers, you find that if something big occurs, they start to produce sequences of numbers that they shouldn't. And people have found certain individuals or groups of individuals can affect those computers to do this. And what they're finding is big global events, and 9/11 was a classic. The computer started to react, but actually several hours before the events began. And that is being used by some as evidence that actually collectively we all do pick up on these things before they happen, and maybe many years before they happen. And so these signs and symbols, it's something feeding through from the collective, and it isn't as such a kind of an evil way of sort of letting us know what they're going to do, but it's more that we all collectively know somehow on some deep subconscious level what the future is going to be. And when you look at some of the experiments that have looked into that, I cannot rule that out. I think there's very good evidence that there may well be a truth to that.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking there about the 100th monkey syndrome, where these monkeys were spotted on one of these remote islands out in wherever, I forget what it was, that they had washed their potatoes on this remote island in the sea to make them either cleaner or taste better, salty or something. And when they said there's a tipping point that when it gets to the 100th monkey that washes its potato in this particular beach on this very remote island, then suddenly all these other monkeys in other islands that can't have possible communication with them suddenly start washing their potatoes as well.
And they didn't have the internet.
Yeah, and they didn't have the internet.
No,
They didn't drink PG Tips tea. Or where they got the potatoes from is a mystery to me. But
I mean, I have to tell you that there are various criticisms of that story, and there are people that don't believe that that's actually strictly true. But then you look at the work of Rupert Sheldrake and morphic resonance, and I think it does become clear that there is some level of connection between everything that lives, and certainly evolutionary tips do seem to get passed on. And I believe the idea of time running in a river is fascinating one, and that, okay, it seems to run in one direction, and if you throw a pebble in, sure, the ripples will soon get carried in the same direction. But if you look momentarily, when you throw the pebble in, ripples go both ways, even though there's a flow going in one direction. And maybe ripples can come backwards in time just for a little bit, sort of when very, very big psychic events happen, usually big shocking things. Princess Diana's death was another one that got a lot of reaction on the computers, for instance. So it may well be that on some collective level, we've long been sort of building to this, and now it's here. We're suddenly seeing all the symbols that, had just leaked through, because on some level we know deep down what's going to occur.
Have you guys heard about the meditation to try and stop coronavirus? Because here's a weird one. Do you remember? I mean, this is only like a couple of months ago. We had the Australian bushfires, didn't we? And they were absolutely raging havoc in Australia, all over the place, and it looked like just the whole country was on fire. And then bizarrely, people started to kind of concentrate or kind of like focus. There were groups focusing on kind of like halting the fires and kind of stopping them. And then almost immediately there was kind of rain pouring down. And, so far as I know, I think they've been extinguished completely. I don't know what your guys' take is on that. Could we do that? Could a mass consciousness focus and meditation on stopping coronavirus be something that helps shift reality in a weird way?
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't do any harm.
Yeah.
And I know some years ago, Uri Geller came up with an idea for the millennium, which was to have everybody in the world focusing on disarming the world's nuclear bombs all at the same time in the hope that they would suddenly not work. Now, he didn't get around to doing it. But, I do think when you do look at some of these experiments, it does suggest that the mind can change things. And certainly there is some evidence, actually, that you can make it rain. If you read some of Andrew Collins' earlier books, that's the Egyptologist Andrew Collins, not the music journalist. He, lists a number of experiments where it's rained when people seem to have connected with some wider energy, when they're performing psychic experiments in stone circles and things like that. And, when we see old movies and there's a haunted house, so often it's pouring with rain and it's thunder and lightning. But there might actually be some kind of psychic link with the elements there. So maybe it's not quite as mad as it looks at first glance. And therefore, everybody praying, if you want, or tuning in, call it whatever you want, does have some collective ripple effect. And the way I see it is that if it's done with the right intent, absolutely, why not? It can only do good, to my view, and not harm.
Well, even on the practical purposes of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, where they get you to think positive over any kind of negative, and you keep retraining your mind to trying to look at everything in a positive way so that your actions start to change and your behavior starts to change maybe over a year, as long as you keep up all these different exercises, that you can turn your life around. So I suppose people doing the similar thing, they might actually come out and not be so fearful, at least on the basic level of the coronavirus, and actually think, okay, I've got a much better handle on this now. I will go out and tackle this, and I'll do this, and I'll do that, and we won't mass panic buy. And that can only have a positive effect, like you say, on something like that. It calms the psyche a little bit, perhaps, of some people. But interestingly, that they've actually banned churches from getting together and praying. So unfortunately, praying to God for help is out now. So we can't use that channel for repentance, at least. So we'll just have to go back to our crystals, I guess, or something like that.
People pray from home. There's no reason why you can pray.
Well, pray from home via the internet, one big prayer mat or something like that. Stephen, anything happening on the psychic level over in the States? Any kind of big hippie movements or psychic groups or anything getting together for some sort of positive change on this that you're aware of?
I did catch one email where I think at 9 o'clock on 3 days ago, everybody was supposed to pray at 9 o'clock. They didn't try to coordinate it. They just said whatever 9 o'clock was with your time. And I didn't pay too much attention to it, honestly. but there are some thoughts along that line. Yeah. What comes to me is, everybody talks about what we are going to do. But when you look at society, you've got too large a percentage of society is selfish, and they tend to kind of put a monkey wrench into everything that we try to do. So what do you do about that? What do you do about the large percentage of people that are just going to live for their own self-interest? That's the problem I see.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's where it comes down, though, to the belief in the critical mass experiments. So, okay, I've just said there the 100 Monkeys story. It does get criticized, but I think there is definitely something to the critical mass idea that you actually don't need to reach a whole majority of the world's population to change them. The experiments show, and Rupert Sheldrake's experiments show, you only need to affect a certain percentage of the population, and then it's like whatever feeling that is being being channeled into that, it suddenly spills out and connects to everybody. And I think the experiments show it's a remarkably few people you need to do that with. So you don't try and reach 100% of the population, because you won't. But if you can just change, I think it's something crazy like even 13%, then a kind of a rolling wave begins, which then carries it forward. So, I mean, therein lies some hope again, because there are a lot of selfish people in the world, but equally, if the intent of the few can sort of spill over, that could be reversed.
I can see that happening where I am. I live in Portland, Maine. And when I got here, I was amazed that the whole place is like a social paradise. I mean, you know, it's normal to be thoughtful here, you know, and it's expected to try to be thoughtful of other people. And, you know, you drive along and people are trying to let you in, and you're walking across the street and everybody's stopping and waving you across. I mean, it's just, you know, but I can't say that 100% of the people in Portland are kind, thoughtful people. It must just have pooched over a few percentage points, like you're saying.
Yeah, so maybe after all this dies down, we might actually be kind of thoughtful for people and considerate and things like that. And you know, when the new neighbours move in across the road, instead of taking round a cake, we'll take round some toilet roll for them instead. Or
I think it will make people reevaluate the value of their lives. I do, actually. And I mean, okay, for all that I've said, I feel some people will try and misuse this for control. I think that a lot of people will, on the other hand, though, see it as a chance to look again at the way they live their lives, how they are with people. Yes, you know, I don't think anything ever has whole bad, and I think good will definitely come out of this.
And presumably, I mean, normal business has stopped in a sense for people's behaviors, attitudes, and working procedures and things like that. So all these charities that are out there helping cats, dogs, homeless people, third world countries, things like that, I presume that they're now really suffering because there's no movement of any of these people being allowed or certainly restricted. So really the people that were very bottom of the pile in society are really not getting any help now.
Yeah, the Peace Corps pulled everybody back, I heard. So just as one example.
Well, yes. And I mean, like immigrants hoping for help here, you know, with people in crisis themselves, sadly, I think they will be even less welcome. So, yeah, I think that will be difficult for a while.
Yeah.
The deaths in Italy, it's just worth kind of pointing out two things. Italy apparently has a much older generation in terms of percentage wise, an older generation. And number two, this is quite an important thing for European people, is the double kiss.
This is what I was saying to Stephen before the show, that Italy are very socially close and kissy, huggy.
Yeah, I've got Sicilian friends, some very wonderful Sicilian friends. And it's at first, when I first kind of like met them, it seemed really bizarre from an English person's point of view to double kiss. It was just an odd thing. But as I got to know them more and more, it's just completely natural. You just do it. You double kiss and that's it. So it's going to be interesting. People are going to have to unlearn social, cultural rituals, I suppose you could call it, or greetings. You know, they're going to have to learn to undo the double kiss, really.
Which I think, though, is again another sadness, because we're already getting socially distanced from each other all the time through the digital world, and this at the other end of it is going to be even more so. And I think for a long while people will feel very dubious about even shaking hands. So I think we're going to be even more cut off from each other, and you know, many believe there is an agenda to do that. And certainly, I think we will be more distanced from each other, living more through digital communication rather than real communication, and I think that will be a shame if that goes on indefinitely.
Yeah, there's almost like we'll become a distrust of people. I mean, you can feel it happening when you go out somewhere. Like I had to go to a certain supermarket last night and pick up prescriptions for someone, not myself, but I had to wait about 15 minutes for them to get prepared. So I found a seat and I sat there, and I saw a sign pinned up in the chemist part of the supermarket saying, "Please allow 1.5 meters between yourself and the next customer." So I was thinking, okay, I'll try and keep. But unfortunately, someone brought their little kid in to get something, and the kid was coming right over next to me and messing about with things on the shelf near me. And I'm thinking, oh God, this kid goes to school with loads of other school kids or something. He's like, he could be a carrier or something. And I started to feel paranoid, and so you start to feel this distrust of people automatically.
Yes.
With your heckles go up about it, and you're thinking, okay, I'm not so worried about getting this myself, but it's if I pass it on to people that are more vulnerable than me. I mean, my dad is 83 now, and he's had a chronic chest condition for quite a few years. He's managing it, but he would come under that vulnerable category. So that is where I kind of get concerned about it. So there is a kind of we're starting to withdraw from people, and we're not being so friendly, and you're kind of seeing a distrust with people. It's just the way we're shaping ourselves up in this present moment. Hopefully, maybe in 6 months' time, we'll all revert back and let's get back to the double kiss on each cheek and all that kind of stuff.
I hope so, but yeah, I think people will be changed by this, and the memory of this won't go away too quickly, because it is one of the biggest socially disruptive things that has occurred since probably World War II. We've certainly here in our countries, we've never known anything like this in recent times. And what's interesting is we now have generations which perhaps rather crudely get labeled the snowflake generation. People, that they struggle with the world, and they've been brought up protected, they've been brought up with everything given to them. Suddenly they're being faced with a world where all their normality is being taken away, and I would imagine that psychologically that will be a real shock to many people. And I suppose the plus that might come out of that is that it might encourage them to realize you're going to need a certain amount of resilience. You can't just lay down and let everything trample over you, but at the same time also, I think many people will struggle to cope, and I think that we will probably see, especially with people running out of money, sadly, a rise in the suicide rate. So there are very serious consequences to this. And I think we've all got used to life being all right, and it's all just trundling along as normal. Many will not know what to do now that isn't the case. And I think, the sooner we accept that normality has ended and this is the new normality, I think that the better we'll be, because I think many of us are still walking around in denial, wishing that it was back to a month ago when everything was lovely and all we heard about was Brexit or whatever. That all seems like halcyon years now. But no, here we are. And we need to grasp this and be real about it. This is happening, and we've got to face it and look it in the eye and make the best of it, and try and see where the gifts of it might be, and try and see what the good could be, and make sure that we, Andy, as you're saying, focus in on that. Good will come of this. There will also be people that will try to abuse this. So we need to feed as much positivity into the collective as we can, and hopefully come out of this with something good. I'm sure we can.
It's like I've got this view of, as you're saying, the resilience and this whole snowflake thing. It's like, where how important is being offended now? How important are the correct gender pronouns now? All of that is completely thrown in the basket, because this is survival now.
And where's Greta Thunberg or whatever that is? Her movements have been restricted, thank God.
Well, that said, though, I mean, we must remember that this has been very helpful to the green lobby. Certainly with flying, as we mentioned earlier on, I think there will be less flights at the other end of this. Many will think that's an absolutely wonderful thing. I mean, maybe it is, but, the danger of that is that then travel becomes for the elite. And then you've got the freedom issues that come with that. So yes, I think we will come out of this with people thinking much more about the way they do things and realizing how clear the air is now. There are far less flights, and yes, there will be genuine things that come out of that. But equally, it's when sustainability then gets used to control basic human freedoms beyond the call of duty, and I think that's where we're going to have to be very careful that it doesn't get abused, and then we're back to Agenda 21 stuff.
I also think that there will be people that are thinking more, more about living off the grid. I mean, I certainly am. I'm thinking about things that I can do for myself, and I'm learning how to, I'm washing my own laundry. I'm dealing with my food differently. And I think, that won't go away necessarily. People will say, you know, I can, because I noticed there's a big sale on generators, solar generators and things like that, you know. So people are thinking, you know, do I really need this infrastructure, or can I, you know, live off the grid to some extent?
Although interestingly, I mean, here in Britain, obviously we're a much smaller country than America, but there seems to be a concerted effort to make sure you can't live off the grid.
Oh, yeah, they don't like it.
There is, you know, there's a move against log burners. They're banning the burning of wet wood soon, things like that, which is actually going to make it very hard to do that in due course. So at the moment here, they seem to be discouraging that at every move.
Well, I think there's a clash of forces there. I mean, I think a lot of the population is thinking, can I live off the grid? But the establishment doesn't want that at all, obviously.
Not at all. No.
Yeah.
Do you think this could bring about changes in governments? Like, obviously, we just had a Tory government voted in December, very unusual time to have an election in the UK anyway. And then suddenly there's, I'm already hearing things about, oh, we need to get rid of Johnson. Let's vote of no confidence, etc., etc. Do you think it's likely that this might rock governments and we could end up with more general elections in the next 6 months or to a year?
Not in Britain, no. I think there is zero chance that Boris Johnson will be kicked out of office. There's a lot of people that don't like him, of course. They still don't like the Tories. They don't like Brexit, and they're trying to mix all of that in. There's many other people that think actually he has stepped up quite well. Some of the perhaps slowness to react, and that has been criticised, but others have said, well, no, that he was doing the right thing. He was trying not to overreact. And what you always need to remember at the moment with Boris Johnson is that the real power behind the throne is Dominic Cummings. Now, Stephen, you may not know this, but Dominic Cummings, he's like the Thomas Cromwell of today. He is a man with very radical ideas, a very deeply sort of conservative person. And we wouldn't say hard right, but very right wing. And absolutely the ultimate Brexiteer. There is simply no way that they are going to let the 80-seat majority they've got in Britain, which is the biggest majority we've had in a long time, suddenly slip away. And I would imagine if you had another vote tomorrow, I think it would be similar. I do not think that at the moment anybody's ready for another election, and there would be no cause to do so. So I would be very, very surprised in this country if that happens. Maybe in Italy, don't know, because it's much more politically destabilized out there anyway. As for, you know, the American election, I mean, that's all going to depend on how much Trump can still seem to be seen as the man that stands up for the average person. If he can still keep that in there, and by giving everybody $1,000, maybe that's the hope. You know, he may well turn the next election around there as well. I mean, Stephen, what do you feel about that? What do you think the odds of Joe Biden coming along are?
Well, my understanding of this is, and I've educated myself a bit on this topic, is that it doesn't matter, that the same people are behind the Democrats and the Republicans. Right. So they won't care who gets in, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, as long as they're in power. What they will not let happen is Bernie Sanders get elected. And my conclusion is we do not have free elections anymore, that they're rigged, flat out rigged, and that there's just there's no democracy here. It sounds pretty radical, but I'm convinced of that now.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're not the only one. I mean, of course, we have similar accusations over here. But I mean, the interesting thing, though, I mean, just to go back to the British thing, I mean, at the last election, for those that say which way an election goes here anyway doesn't change anything, I mean, that was a history-changing election, because there's no question, had we all voted to the left and gone with, say, the Labour Party here, Brexit would not have occurred. I mean, it's only just beginning now, and we've already said it's getting disruptive, but it would not have occurred, and things would have gone a very, very different road. So certainly the last election that we had, I think, had a huge effect here. But yeah, in America, you may well be right. Yeah, it could be very different. And certainly electoral fraud, I just do not know how you stamp that out. But certainly the more electronic voting you have, I don't think there's any way of ever knowing for certain that those elections are accurate or fair, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, there's no real practical way of, even if they wanted an election right now, that they could carry it out, given the things they're having to do at the moment, restricting movement and restricting meetings, because you can't go around knocking on people's door, canvassing for your party. You can't have election rallies or anything like that. and it'd be the wrong time really to have an
Even the
election in
poll
this
booths and the
crisis.
queues. If you have a poll booth and you've got a busy area, you can have a queue. That's no good, kind of.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
truly don't believe there is the impetus for another election here.
No.
I think we are years off personally, unless something goes very, very badly wrong. But at the moment, I just don't see that happening. Not here.
I mean, you could end up with a crisis situation where they say, absolutely, this government is no good for whatever reason, and literally, say the Labour Party will literally just take over as the emergency government of the day or something without an election because of whatever reason. I don't know. You know, Boris Johnson's died, and all his cabinet have died of the coronavirus or something like that. You know, that does get extreme. But my God, we've had some extreme world situations in the past.
That's true. That's true. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that Boris Johnson is, I think, something like 33rd in line to the British throne as well. He is. Yeah, that is true. That is true. So who knows? Could be King Boris after all.
Wow.
Are there any positive things that you know we can, because we don't want to be completely doom and gloom, and I think it's morale is really important. I think it's morale that got Britain through the Blitz in the Second World War. I don't like the idea of false hope because I don't think that's productive. But is there any realistic hope that we can give to viewers?
No, no, just kidding. Short answer. Well, I think we'll get through this. You know, it's the next one that worries me. It's not this one. Yeah.
What's the next one, Stephen?
Well, I don't know, but I think that this is relatively mild. But if we had something like Ebola that you know went worldwide, it's a whole different story.
I wish we could ban biolabs, at least biolabs that generate, you know, weapons like this.
I agree. Yeah.
Madness.
No, I think the positive that will come out of this will be people will be forced to look at themselves. They're now having to relook at their lives. We've all been trapped in routines for so long, and suddenly those routines, many of them are coming to an end, and you're faced with the reality of who you are and what you do with your time. And suddenly people are finding themselves with much more time on their hands. And the positive of that is they're going to have to really look, therefore, at what counts. We all get trapped in these routines and we forget to think about what really matters. I think people will look at that again. I think they'll come out of this and reevaluate the way they're earning their money, how sustainable that was in the first place, and there'll be hopefully some balanced solutions. Then we'll get offered all the false ones that we've all been talking about, the very overt misuse of it for control. But I hope that enough people will see just within themselves that they've got a period of time now for reflection, to do some things they haven't done for a while and get back to who they are and to be with their loved ones and, you know, not have a barrier between them. We're all rushing around. We're all on our phones all the time. We're all doing things, you know, maybe what will come out of this is more human communication. Once we come out of our little trapped in doors boxes, maybe we'll all be desperate to get back to human communication again, and then something deeper will come in. I certainly hope so.
I also think that community spirit is really important, and if we get to a stage where the virus is either gone or allowed to kind of like come out of our homes and do normal things, I really hope we can go back to kind of like localization. This is not globalization, localization, where communities look after each other, where you've got people helping each other, and there are actually groups apparently of people willing to help vulnerable and elderly people on Facebook and other kind of apps where they're prepared to do their shopping and deliver and you know, help them out. I think that's really going to be important. I think people need to learn how to grow food. I think allotments would be a great idea. I'd love to see kind of gardens or sections of gardens for growing food and getting back to that. I think that would really help things, definitely.
And of course, many people, they're volunteering at hospitals and, you know, even putting themselves at risk to do it. People are generally quite marvelous. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I know I write about conspiracies and, you know, I'm always talking about that side of it. But I also recognize that most people at heart are good. Yeah. They might act out of fear sometimes or panic, but on the whole, they're generally nice to people. And most people just want to get on and live their lives, and they're not out to get anybody else. And you know, sometimes, like you say, in a time of crisis, we do see that come out. And yeah, I think community could grow stronger from this. I mean, just locally where I live, there's WhatsApp groups beginning now, so that if anybody gets sick, you know, people will know and they can offer help. And so, yes, I think this is where we might find more cohesion at the other end of all of this. So even as people try to abuse it, if enough people have the right intent and come from the right opposite approach of actually caring for each other, I think something really good could come out of this.
I hope so.
And this is really where the difference is. What you know, Bill Gates was talking about in his video, the fact that we've got this technology now that can help us. You know, we can keep track of these illnesses or people that are vulnerable. Whereas back in 1918, you couldn't tell. You know, you'd get something by a letter or something. So and so's not very well today or something. That'd be 5 days old. Whereas we can know within 20 minutes about someone that needs help.
Yeah.
And that's where the technology can help us, and we can rally things together fairly quickly, which I think is part of the battle to get on top of this. Well, I think we've probably covered most of the ground tonight, chaps. So I think we'll perhaps roll this to an end.
Yeah.
Again, technology's been our saving grace, even though it's stopped recording sometimes, but apologies for that, but we'll try and patch it up in some ways. But it's been a very interesting chat, and obviously not everyone's going to agree with our viewpoints, but we're just exploring ideas and concepts and where we're going with this sort of thing. So this is a Paranormal Peep Show coronavirus special you've been watching or listening to. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to Stephen Sakellarios in Portland in Maine for joining us, Andy Thomas in Sussex for joining us of the Conspiracies book, who we had on a few months ago, and he's on the your website is the
truthagenda.org. Truthagenda.org.
Yeah, truthagenda.org if you want to know about Andy's website there. And it's very very, very much thanks to Andy Chaplin again for taking time out to come into us to join our show.
I want to add, just want to add a couple of practical steps that people could take. So if people got a recycling bin and they're throwing in the recycling bin water bottles, I would urge people to get those water bottles out, or any plastic bottles with kind of lids on them where foodstuffs was stored. So not things like, for instance, fairy liquid and stuff, because we don't want to give ourselves funny stomachs, but plastic bottles that are drinkable, fill them with water, store them somewhere in case the water, we're talking worst case scenario, hope it never happens, but think ahead, think 2 months, 3 months, 4 months ahead. Store water aside. When you go to the supermarket, toilet roll, okay, is important. If you can get it, great. But food, canned food, fresh food is going to go off. Store as much fresh food as you can in fridges and freezers, but bear in mind, if the electricity goes down, you will need to rely on tinned food. Get yourself a survival book. Stock up on vitamin C, stock up on supplements. This is an interesting one. Apparently, I came across a report a few months ago. Some weeds are actually more nutritional than fruit and vegetable. Sounds bizarre, but people don't like eating weeds.
We have weeds in our juices, my girlfriend and I.
So basically, download a list of edible, non-poisonous weeds that are edible. Okay, maybe something like a foraging book would be good. You've got to be really careful with fungus, mushrooms, and toadstools. Toadstools are highly poisonous. You could die. Some of them are hallucinogenic, but there are edible mushrooms out there. Find out which is which. Really, I would urge people to go to garden centres to start getting an interest in gardening, to start maybe thinking about learning off the older generation of how to do allotments. A lot of generations are not learning how to do allotments. We may need to go back to that, and just stay positive. The positivity thing is so crucial. I think that in the Second World War, if we just gave up, that's it, we'd be under German control. Right. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant advice. Thank you, Andy. And I'm going to look into my little chemistry set to find a cure.
So thanks, guys, for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we'll look out for you guys on various shows and various websites and various books and things like that. So thank you indeed for everyone joining us, and thank you for the audience for listening and watching, and hope that you can too stay safe in the coming weeks and months. Thanks very much indeed. This is the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Good night, all.
Good night. Take care.
Night.
Thank you.